Hey everybody, I'm Zach Giltz. Welcome to video 5 for our class. This video is going to focus on chapters 9 and 10, which gets into Vocalics, as well as Covert subcodes. But we'll start with Vocalics, which for our intents and purposes in this class and in our books, is going to be synonymous to paralanguage. Not all studies or academics agree on that, but again, for our class, Vocalics and paralanguage will be synonymous. And these are just vocal gestures. So last time we talked about more physical gestures, hands, facial cues, things like that. And this is all about how our nonverbal vocal cues can be kind of perceived as vocal gestures. So that's going to be our accent, emphasis, pitch, rate, and pause, as well as grunts, screams, laughs, gasps, silence, and sighs. Sighs, not like big or small, but rather like a sigh. And then these are all, they add meaning to our verbal communication. So just like gestures reinforce what we're saying, kind of carry through what we're saying, these vocal gestures are just the same, right? So they're just kind of adding to the verbal message that we're sending, the verbal communication. And then if you think about someone who's really monotonous, right? They speak with the monotone, kind of droll and droning, just da 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 da. Yes, you might receive factual information from that person, but you're not necessarily receiving any affectual information. You're not picking up on any cues necessarily other than just what's being said. So again, these vocalics just kind of add to the meaning and back everything up. So a huge important part of this is sound, particularly sound produced during speech. So there's several components to this, which is loudness, or the intensity of voice. Something I thought was really, really fascinating is that loudness does not have to pertain to volume. You can be loud simply by increasing your intensity rather than just raising your voice. So something I think about for this is kind of like using your dad voice. I don't quite do this with my daughter yet because she wouldn't fully understand it, but especially like with the students, I work with 6th through 12th graders. And so sometimes you just have to pull out the dad voice. You don't necessarily have to be louder, but you just denote like, hey, this is a serious space now. And I need you to not do that or whatever it is, you know. Our pitch, the range in voice, and how we use it in conversation. So a lot of us kind of have from very high to very low pitch ranges. And the best way I can think to convey this is questions, right? So if you're asking a question, are you going to raise your voice at the end? Probably. Another really easy way to identify pitch, since we don't often think about it, is kind of a male going through puberty. A lot of times there's that voice breaking, and we notice the breaks more than we notice kind of the fluctuations, because those tend to be quite smooth. The duration, how long or short are you making sound? Kind of quick and choppy can denote kind of more stress, whereas maybe a smoother or longer might be a bit more relaxed duration. The quality of your voice, so your timbre, tonality, the airflow through your glottis. This one's a little tough for me, but I kind of think of like an exasperated tone, kind of conveying like almost hoarse, like you're just kind of at your wit's end, and the quality of your voice is conveying that some. Regularity or tempo, this is the rate at which we speak, and then also kind of fluctuation in pitch as well. Articulation is that clarity and control of our speech. This kind of makes me think of like a debutante class. I've never taken one, but I would assume that this is just a big part of it, right? How we're speaking. Is it understandable? And another aspect of that, but is its own, is pronunciation as well, which is that control of sound, rhythm, and rate. So how we're able to speak. And then lastly, silence. Again, a pretty fascinating one. The absence of sound, not necessarily one that we think of, but may in fact be the most kind of dramatic. How are we pausing? Where are we leaving space? And what's the intention of that? This leads us into vocal functions, right? Why are we doing all of this? And these are generally purely auditory cues, right? So again, those visual gestures, we have a lot of ways to take that in, right? The eyes, the ears, kind of things, but for this, it's purely just our ears are all we really get to work with for these vocal functions, vocalic functions. And the first example of this is kind of identification and self-presentation of the speaker. So there's a guy at work, anytime I call him, he has the same answer. Hey, this is Will. Cool. Right off the bat, I know. All right, you're denoting that through your presentation, you are being professional and you want to get right to the point. You're telling me your name, but it's also really consistent. So it's the same response every time. And so I know, oh, that is Will. And now I need to tell him what I'm calling about. Controlling the interaction. This can be done kind of through hesitation, pauses, or interruption. So again, kind of if you're in a conversation, if you're constantly cutting someone off, you're really changing the tempo of the conversation and how it might flow without that. Or if you were the one speaking, kind of taking a pause and slowing everything down, right? So that's controlling the interaction. The relationship with others, with other reactants is another aspect of this. So that it impacts the voice that we choose, right? If you're around someone that you're very warm towards, you might be more soft and caring with your tone. If you're with someone that you don't really want to be spending time with, you might be more curt and aggressive with your tone and just kind of short with them and let them know, hey, I'm not really here to stick around, right? So we can denote a lot with that. Displaying cognitive and affective information. That's affective with an A. So we're not trying to just be effective, but rather how are we denoting emotion, and then how are we in that cognitive, just kind of relaying practical information. And then lastly in this set is deception. So vocalic functions, deceptions, this last one. And this is really interesting again to me because we can raise our voices, or raise our pitch rather, when we are kind of trying to deceive someone. Our voice might go a little bit higher if we're trying to convince someone of something that we know isn't true. But this is not fleshed out as consistent. So there are kind of reports that they go back and forth on that. And then these are all compared against normal conversation, and maybe somebody else will get into that, but for our purposes, we're gonna keep rolling because I wanted to close with this. And it's crazy. So chapter 10 gets into covert subcodes, which is biofeedback, olfaction, and had trouble with this one, chronemics. But we're gonna focus on olfaction because how wild is it that odors and smells and scents impact the way that we communicate. So our book calls olfaction or odors kind of this forgotten sense, and that is the sense of smell. Particularly for our purposes, in the cases it relates to our daily routine. So not so much about just like smelling a flower or anything like that, but what's the impact of odors on our daily routine? Odor remains in memory longer than what we see or hear, which is pretty wild. And some reasons that this might be is for the nearness of sensory input to our brain. So your olfactors are right in here, obviously your brain's right there. And then for me, kind of your auditory is right here and your brain's right there. So that one doesn't quite add up to me. But this odor is a more direct and less edited message. And that one kind of checks out, right? It's just right up and then immediately like you're taken to kind of some sort of memory or some sort of judgment is being made. And then lastly, the association between odor and our situation. And this one checks out to me, that like kind of what you're smelling around you can kind of take you back and forth between different situations that you've been in the past. Regardless, we are each impacted by odors, especially people with foul odors, right? So if you and I were just hanging out and I was just putting off a really bad smell, regardless of how our interaction went, you would probably remember me as just a reprehensible person that you do not want to be spending time with, because that smell conveys such a strong message to us. Our gender and age impact how we identify odor. Oftentimes females and younger people are better at identifying scents. And then males can do kind of some olfactory training to kind of catch up. And then olfactory memory, right? You might smell a t-shirt and take you back to the presence of a loved one or a good memory. I was always taught as a kid to like smell a peppermint while you're studying for an exam, and then like smell a peppermint while you're taking the exam, and hopefully that helps. And maybe that olfactory memory would kind of kick in there. And then lastly, olfactory deja vu. This is wild, but that a scent could carry you so far like back to a place that you've already been. So deja vu is a phenomenon, right, where you have an experience that you have already experienced, And it just feels kind of almost out of body. And so that our scent, our olfactors could take us into that phenomenon. It's just really bizarre to me. So with that, thank you all so much for joining me. There is a ton in chapters 9 and 10. I obviously could not cover it all. So be sure to check out some of our peer videos, and obviously, hopefully you read as well. But I look forward to seeing your video too. Thanks, bye.